Welcome everybody back to the summit. I have a very gorgeous woman who I've got here today, Elly Taylor, and I've studied with Elly. I'll let her talk about her work, but she's really filling a gap that has been overlooked for a really long time. And of course, in the Parent Growth Zones, we talk about protecting your significant relationships. And this has been an area of fascination for Elly for quite a long time now. So welcome, Elly. It's so lovely to see you.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
That's great. So tell us, how did you come to be doing this work? Tell us a bit about you.
Sure. So, okay, how much time have we got? So I became a relationship counsellor at the same time that I became a parent. And just to give you a bit of background, my husband and I were crazy in love for about 10 years before we, started a family, and having a baby was our natural next step. We just purchased our first home. I was ready to leave my career behind. It was definitely a planned pregnancy. We had a really trouble-free pregnancy. It was a great experience for us. And we had an amazing birth experience. We had a fantastic midwife who just choreographed this beautiful birth experience for us. But at about 3 weeks in, the wheels kind of started to fall off, and we were exhausted and time poor, and we started arguing more. And I was thinking, what's happening to us? This is supposed to be great. This is supposed to be the best thing that's ever happened to us. And I was just in this really, really weird place. So I switched. I was studying psychology at that time, but I was really compelled to figure out what was happening to us. And so I switched to relationship counselling. And so I did a relationship counselling certificate over 2 years and started working with clients. And this time I was pregnant with our second baby. So we did what lots of people do when they're not so happy after their first baby. They have another one.
Put more pressure on.
Put more pressure on. So I was pregnant with our second. We had a 3-year-old, and I was working with client after client after client that were really going through the same things that my husband and I had been through, and also in some ways we're still going through. And I realized that nothing that I'd learned in my psychology courses, in the sociology courses I did, even in my relationship counselling certificate and some of the other courses that I'd done, nothing quite fit for the couples that I was working with and for what my husband and I had experienced.
Yeah, right.
And I was really frustrated by that, because I just spent 5 years studying to do this work, and yet nothing, there were bits and pieces that fit, but nothing quite fit. There was no model. I'd learned lots of different models of working with clients and with couples, but there wasn't a model that fit exactly for what I was seeing over this time. And so I got into this work personally, based on my own personal experience and really wanting to find some answers and a way forward for us. And so what I started to do was pay really, really close attention to the stories of the clients that I was seeing, whether this was individual, mothers or fathers or parents, or whether it was a couple. And I noticed that there was a really similar story with all of these parents. And so I started to track these stories. How did this start? Where did this begin? And then what happened? And then what happened? And then what happened? And I know, and just charting or tracking those stories, I noticed that there was different stages in these stories, that often this happened, and then when this happened, something else happened. And then if that happened, then something else happened. And there was a really common thread, some really common threads running through all of this. And so that's how the stages came about. And so I had all this stuff in my head, and I put it into a book. The book's called Becoming Us. It's the Couple's Guide to Parenthood. And then after the book was published, I started talking about some of this stuff on Facebook, actually, and got a lot of people saying, wow, this really resonates with me. This is really interesting. I want to learn more. And then from there, I started getting invitations to present at conferences, including conferences overseas. And it was incredibly exciting. because most of the time I was just a mum, you know, a mum and a wife and a relationship counsellor. So yeah, things started to really move from there. And I found that the more I talked about this stuff, the more it was resonating with people, and the more it was resonating with people, the more I realized that other professionals, you know, other people that worked with expectant or new parents could benefit from learning the framework, I suppose, is what it's evolved into.
Yeah,
and of
gosh,
course,
that's really interesting, Elly. Like, you go in thinking it's going to just make your relationship, and your relationship's under enormous stress. And what I marvel at in working with families is, and certainly my own experience of going through it also with my husband, is people don't teach you the skills and the tools to be able to work through this. So why don't you tell us now a little bit about the stages that you notice people go through, and perhaps give us a few hints?
Yeah, sure, of course. Okay. So I guess and it's tricky, you know, because it's tricky because, you know, when you're expecting, you do have these really high expectations, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you sort of don't know what you don't know. You know, I liken parenthood like thinking that you're going to Hawaii, you know, and packing your bags for Hawaii and ending up on a mountaintop in Switzerland instead. You know, the plane's rerouted and you're in a completely different country with a completely different climate and a completely different language, and you've got to adapt really quickly because this is your reality for now, and you've got to adapt really quickly. So it's, you know, it is tricky equipping couples before they need it, but then often when they need it, they're tired and time poor and sleep deprived, and they're not in the best place to learn these, you know, skills and things that you're talking about. But but that's the challenge, isn't it, for all of us? So the stages. So I found the first stage I call pack carefully. And it's basically being aware of what you will need once your baby arrives. And so what I did with the stages is I identified the main stresses in each stage, and then how couples can manage those stresses in each stage, and also then prepare for the next stage. Right. So I hope that you'll see that the later stages build on the earlier stages. It's a way of helping them to kind of develop the skills and the strategies as they go. And the sooner they can apply the skills and strategies, the easier the later stages will be. So stage one I call pack carefully. And the big stresses for parents are, like I said, just lack of awareness of what life with a real baby is like. Most parents these days don't grow up in extended families. You know, a generation or a couple of generations ago, you had women having, you know, babies when they had teenagers. So all the older children got to grow up with younger children, but that's not the case anymore. So most couples just don't have the opportunity to have that experience. They often during pregnancy have a lot of pressure to be happy and to be excited. And, you know, we celebrate pregnancy. It's, you know, we have this kind of bon voyage kind of attitude towards pregnancy. And yes, there are so many things worth celebrating, but it's also the biggest life change that parents and couples are likely to will experience in their lifetime, and pretty early on in their relationship. And so that does come with a lot of new stresses and a lot of adjustments. Sometimes parents get the gory birth stories that they have to deal with, which can be really, you know, anxiety provoking and unnecessary. So they've got to deal with that, which can be very confronting. And then often there's kind of like a low level anxiety I find with parents about the unknowns. You know, so that they know they're going into a life change, but they don't really know what that's going to mean for them. And so it's kind of managing any stress or managing any anxiety about the unknowns. So stage one is all about taking off stress as much as possible and knowing how to manage any future stresses. So, for example, I tell parents and couples to avoid making any other big decisions as so many parents do. They think, okay, I'm pregnant, now we need to get a new car, we need to find a new house, we need to, you know, take that promotion that might be offered to us or whatever. But what that does is just really, really bring on more financial pressure, more new stresses at a time when they really, really don't need it. So I tell couples, you know, the new car, the new house, the new career, the new job can wait until after the baby's born. The baby does not need a spare bedroom. They don't need a bigger car. They don't need a new neighborhood. You know, they just need you and your arms and your support system. So yeah, to just delay, don't upsize. Even downsize if you can, if it means moving closer to supports, because you don't want those extra pressures. And then we talk about family-friendly stress relief, that the way that you relieve stress during pregnancy or before you have your baby might not work after the baby comes, and in fact might put more pressure on your partner after the baby comes. So it's really important that the stress relief that you're using is family friendly. And so we talk about some, you know, some different options for that. Then address all the practicalities about, you know, freezing meals and getting a meal train organised. Anything that takes pressure off those first precious few weeks afterwards is part of this stage. And then
it's hard to know how absorbing a baby's going to be until you're actually in it, and how 24/7 and consistent it is. It's often the biggest shock people discover.
Huge, how relentless,
yeah,
and continuous and exhausting it all is. But even being told, organise a meal train for your first 6 weeks, you know, forget the expensive baby paraphernalia that you may or may not use. You know, a meal train for the first weeks can take an enormous amount of pressure off. Yeah. So if you want to buy me something, buy me a doula, a postnatal doula, or you know,
food.
Anything that can take pressure off, even if it's a little thing, can make a big difference. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of flag those things where we can. And then I think something else that we do is teach communication skills. Let parents know that the immediate period after baby, you're going to be tired. You're not going to be at your best when you're communicating with your partner, but how you communicate with each other is really important. Because when we're sleep deprived and when we're distracted by gorgeous little babies with, you know, just those gorgeous everything, we can be really careless in our communication with our partner, but it can also hurt more at that time. We're really vulnerable. And we are also, I'll talk about this in a later stage, emotionally primed. So we're more sensitive emotionally. So it's really important for partners to know to be gentle with each other, I suppose. So then stage 2 is called nest building. Build a nest. And it's the immediate stage when we get the baby home, and it's all about creating a lovely, safe, warm environment to bring them home to, or to have them in. And I tell couples in this stage to tune out all the outside stuff. The rest of the world can wait for a period of time, whether that's 2 weeks or a month or 6 weeks, or as long as you've got, the rest of the world can wait. I tell them to stop watching the news. It's too depressing. Put the screens aside. You know, the big news is right there, right there in your arms. And to really just carve out a space for nesting and resting and bonding and just finding your feet as new parents, because that takes up a lot more time, effort, attention and energy than most people realize. And so it's all about just, you know, creating this little nest and reaching out for help, and letting parents know that reaching out for help is normal for new parents and needed by new parents. And it's not a sign of not coping. It's not a sign of struggling. It's not a sign of anything bad happening. It's always going to take a village. And so letting couples know that there's a village, or parents know that there's a village there for them, and taking advantage of that.
I think that's one of the hardest that you've just mentioned there. Culturally, we don't do this very well at all. And yet in other cultures, everybody surrounds the new family.
Absolutely.
Very old tradition.
Absolutely. And it's and they need to, because the biggest stresses in this stage is lack of preparation, taking on too much, and not reaching out for help, because and that leaves a couple stretched very, very thin, and we don't want stretched thin couples to have to look after a vulnerable little baby that depends on them. We want resourced couples and supported couples or parents to be able to look after this baby, because it does take a village, as you said. Yeah. So that's stage 2. Stage 3 is about adjusting expectations, which you've mentioned before. You know, like once you've and you can't really do this until you've got the baby and the new life, because it's all theory before then, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so stage 3 is about recognizing that there's going to be a period when your expectations might not meet the reality, and that could be about the baby that you end up with, it could be about yourself as a new parent. It could be about your partner as a new parent. It could be about your own parents wanting to be more involved than you expected or less involved than you expected, and about making all those adjustments and giving yourselves a couple of months to just figure it out. You know, to just be learners and not experts, and to just figure it out, because the stresses of this stage are when couples expect to be happy all the time. They expect to be blissfully in love all the time. They expect their parents to be more or less involved. They expect their life not to change as much. They expect to be able to take the baby with them. So there's this period of adjustment. And so that's the 3rd stage in the Becoming Us framework, is for couples and parents to cut themselves a whole lot of slack, and to cut their partners a whole lot of slack while they're just figuring this stuff out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So give us a bit of an idea, Elly, in terms from a research point of view around what we know about the, because I think I remember in your training hearing some of the figures around the first year of parenting and the rates of separation and things like that, just to give us a bit of perspective, because I think it might shock people when they hear this.
Yeah, it probably will. So I'll talk about it a little bit more in the later stages. But so 92% of parents actually report increased conflict in their first year after baby. And I think you can probably already see just in those early 3 stages how that could start to happen. That if they're not prepared, that if they're not getting enough support, that's putting a lot of pressure on their relationship. If their expectations aren't in line with the reality, that's going to cause conflict. So everything that we talk about in these stages, all these stresses, all these pressures can cause increased conflict. And then following on from that, about 67% of couples will find that their relationship actually declines in the first 3 years after baby. So it's really common that, that new parents are really struggling in that area particularly, which can be very reassuring for parents to hear if they are struggling, that actually it's really, really normal.
Really normal, yeah.
That, all your attention and effort is going into looking after your beautiful new baby, which leaves very little over for you to look after yourselves and each other, which is actually leads nicely into our next stage, which is what I call set up base camp. And so this is the stage around 4 to 6 months after the babies come, when the new normal has started to happen. The expectations have started to settle down. Couples have started to adjust. This is the opportunity for couples, now that the baby's probably started to get into some sort of routine, for them to start to really focus on, okay, we've kept the baby alive. The baby's doing well. The baby's well loved and thriving. What we now need to do is to turn our attention to ourselves and to each other, because we're in this for the long haul. And this is the stage where the cumulative effects of broken sleep and poor nutrition and stresses adding up really can start to take its toll on a couple, but it's also an opportunity for them to be mindful of this and to think, okay, we really need to turn our attention on ourselves. And so stage 4 is, I call it base camp, because there's always going to be challenges ahead. There's always going to be things for you to need to cope with, you know, whether it's job losses, whether it's, you know, like a grandparent gets ill, or whether it's, you know, a global pandemic, or, you know, there's always going to be stuff ahead that you are going to want to cope with as a family. But this stage really is about taking the time to think what helps us to cope.
Yeah. And
focusing on things, really basic things like nutrition. What's your nutrition been like for the last, you know, 4 or 5 months? Let's pay some attention to that. What's your stress relief been like? Has it been family friendly, or do you need to, you know, think about some new ways of relieving stresses that are more family friendly? You know, what's your support system been like? You know, we've been saying all along, build up your support system, build up your support system. Now might be your chance, if you haven't done it before, to build up your support system. And it might be talking to a co-worker at work who's just had a new baby, and then you become their support system and they become your support system. You know, it could be reaching out to some of those organizations that people may or may not have mentioned to you before now. You know, it could be drumming up conversations with other parents at your local playground or your local cafe, you know, other parents with a baby in a pram. It could be really reaching out now that you realise, now that you know exactly how much support you would have benefited from beforehand, and really just starting to find that tribe, to build that community, which is what I love about what you're doing, Tracy, connecting parents together.
Yeah, one of the things, Elly, that I invite people to realise at this phase, because that setting up base camp, what you're talking about there is the and really starting to exercise our capacity to resource ourselves once the shock of the changes have happened. It is really fertile ground for relationships to start to transition into a phase of maturity. The romance is gone, the novelty's gone. Or your partner's probably seeing more of you than you have. I mean, all sorts of things. The mysteries disappeared. But it is fertile ground for couples to really start to invite a greater level of communication once they start to learn, which is what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
But when you've been in the trenches together, like you are when you've got a new baby, it also invites a greater level of intimacy, because when you've shared something as intensely hard as getting to know a newborn and dealing with the constancy of it, that's also can be a really bonding experience for couples.
Absolutely, which leads perfectly into what the next stage is.
There you go.
This is great.
I'm following you, Elly. I'm following
you are, and you've done the training, so which is embracing emotions.
Yeah.
So we bond through other people through our emotions, and it's easier to bond with other people who are feeling the same emotions as we are. And you know, it is such an emotional roller coaster. Pregnancy and early parenthood is an emotional roller coaster like nothing else that I've certainly ever experienced in my life, or that I've heard most of my clients experience in their life. It's, you know, the highs are higher and the lows are lower. And that's partly because parents are actually biologically primed to be emotionally sensitive.
Yeah. I love how you brought this up. I say this to pregnant women all the time, you know, when they have get frustrated about baby brain and I cry at the drop of a hat, and I say no, your intellect's being turned down and your emotional intelligence is being turned up, because when you have a new baby, it's not about thinking what your baby needs, it's about feeling what your baby needs. And there's great intelligence to those changes.
Oh, absolutely. And interesting, it's not just mums that have the hormonal changes, that men and dads have the hormonal changes too, not necessarily to the same degree, which can create some differences, but they also are being biologically primed to be sensitive to their baby's cues and to feel those emotions so that they're motivated to care for them. So it's just this really, like you said, it's a window of opportunity for couples to become bonded at a deeper level.
Yeah, right.
And when they know this, when they don't take that extra emotional sensitivity personally, because that's what can happen for some couples too, is that they can start to get defensive and start to take things personally, and that can cause conflict and can start to cause some disconnection between couples, and that relates to that 67% of couples that have less relationship satisfaction. But if we know about this emotional sensitivity, and if we know how to work with it, both within ourselves and with our partner, and invite each other in and share with each other at that deeper level, then this really can take a couple's relationship to a whole new level.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that family foundations are built at a deeper level.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the beauty of this work, that when we can support couples and couples can support each other to go to that level, to go to that place, and be that vulnerable together, then they're actually laying some really strong, deep roots or foundations for their family going forward. Because one day it's going to be those children that will be coming to them with those feelings.
Yeah.
And one day they will be, having to help their children manage those strong emotions when they start kindy or preschool or whatever. Part of being a parent is about helping our children to manage their emotions appropriately. And so it's kind of like a trial run. It's kind of like, I think of this stuff as pre-parenting in some ways, because it's experimenting, in ourselves and with our partner to do stuff that then will benefit our children. Yeah.
Can I tell you a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely.
When I had my first son, Sam, we'd had a little bit like you. We'd had an amazing birth, and I was just high on oxytocin, I think, for, I don't know, weeks. And then there was a point about 6 weeks, and I decided that I'd had enough of my husband, and I was packing my bags and I was heading out the door. And we'd had a big fight, and it just all came to the surface. And I was leaving him. I'd had enough. I wasn't putting up with anything more. And he said to me, well, you're not taking the baby. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, you're not. That baby's not going anywhere without me. And I went, well, we better work it out then. It was that moment. I think that immature version of us where, you could just slam doors and leave and make a big scene had to die away because there was more at stake. And that was kind of this first pivotal moment of, shit, we've got to work this stuff out. There's more at stake here now.
Got to work this stuff
and 31 years in, and I'm still into him, but we've gone, he laughs because he thinks he's been married to about 5 different women in that time.
Oh my gosh. Which again leads perfectly into the next stage. I'm like, you've been studying.
I've been living your work, Elly, is what I've been doing. Everything you're saying is so resonating.
Well, this is what I experienced myself too. Like, I love what you just said about, you were 5 different women, because having a baby changes us.
Yeah, yeah. And that's good.
And that's great. Some couples struggle most couples struggle when the stay-at-home parent has more opportunities to grow into a new parent self. And so you often find that there's, again, this goes into that divide that I was talking about before, that the stay-at-home parent will change more and faster.
Yeah.
Because of their environment.
Yeah, they have to.
They have to.
What's being demanded of them. Yeah.
They have to. And that can make it hard for the other partner and for them to relate to each other as a couple when the parent who's still out working in their old job has their old friendships, their world hasn't changed. But for the stay-at-home parent, their work life's changed, their friendships may have changed. Their day-to-day life certainly has changed. And so there can be a little bit of a disconnect. And so the next stage is all about growing into your parent self and supporting your partner to also grow into their parent self.
Right.
so that it's something that you're doing together as a couple, not necessarily at the same time or to the same degree, but you're both allowing for this process to happen. And so, you know, you just illustrated it beautifully.
How do people do that? Like, what, I mean, I can think back to my own experience, but how do people reconnect that mismatch? Because it is, what you've described is very real.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's some don'ts. The biggest don't is don't blame each other.
Yeah.
Don't blame each other for the changes that are occurring, because they're normal and natural changes that everybody's going through, but because they're not talking about them, or they don't see that these are normal and desirable changes, because they feel awkward, they feel clunky, they feel uncomfortable. So don't blame your partner for not changing as much as you are, because their life is you know, it is different. So it's about not blaming each other, and often not blaming each other and not being resentful is enough. Is enough, because it can cause a lot of resentment when, say, one partner's stuck at home all day looking after the baby, and the other partner just gets to come and go, you know, as if the baby doesn't exist. So it's being aware that that's a bit of a trap, I suppose, that couples can get into, and that it takes time for both parents, or for, you know, both members of the couple, or parents, to grow into that parent self. And it does tend to happen for mothers or stay-at-home parents before it does for fathers or non-stay-at-home parents. Even in terms of bonding with the baby, like, I know that with couples, with some couples, you know, mum, for example, can feel bonded with the baby way before the baby's born, and the dad or partner might not feel like they're bonded with the baby until they can kick a football around with them in the backyard. Because bonding is all about having experiences that we can both relate to, that we can both be in. So I think knowing that it's normal, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with the partner or wrong with the relationship. And that's often when the problems can creep in, is when people think that there's something wrong with the partner or the relationship, and then that becomes the problem.
Because bonding is a very unique and individual experience, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, we do know that the more engaged each parent is with the baby, the more they work out the baby, which means they get more confident, which then means they're going to enjoy the baby more, which then means they're going to be wanting to be with the baby more. So it's a bit of a cycle.
Absolutely.
If one parent is not feeling as adequate with the baby and tends to hold back, tends to let the other parent do it, that's a real recipe for disconnect and resentment to be bred. Resentment, Elly, is one of the things I hear the most in my new parents groups is, you know, oh, their life has hardly changed and they don't understand what I'm going through. And we can encourage people to be transparent and share the deeper experience of what it's like, and how some days are really hard and other days it can be lovely. But how would you encourage people in that space? Because that's a very tender moment to particularly the at-home parent, to overcome some of that resentment that can start to creep in.
Yeah, sure. I think recognize that it's normal. Recognize that the partner can't really change their whole life. But that there are things that they can do to help them feel connected through the day, maybe, and then to reconnect at the end of the day. So I tell couples, you know, it's really important for the stay-at-home parent to think that you haven't completely forgotten about them. So just to send an email or an SMS or a message just to check in during the day, how you're doing, so that there's an opportunity for the partner at that point to say, I'm ready to tear my hair out. You know, you might not be able to do anything about it, but at least they know that you care enough to send a message. And that means that by the time the partner gets home, maybe that's enough. They feel like they've said what they need to say. And so it's not all bottling up throughout the day, ready to explode as soon as the door's opened. I also encourage couples to reconnect before they each debrief their days. So just like, how are you? Give them a hug, have a hug, just reconnect as a couple. And then when you're feeling connected, to debrief your days. And it might be that one had a shocking day at work, or one had a shocking day at home, or they both had a shocking day. I really tell couples not to get into competition with each other about who had the worst day, which I know I did with my husband. You know, they're both working for the success of their family. You know, whether that's the financial success, creating the financial stability, whether it's the, you know, the caring day-to-day messy tasks, recognize that they're both working, and that they both want, you know, a happy and healthy family. And I think what you said before about involving the partner, you know, this baby has two parents, and I really, really, really encourage partners to be as hands-on as possible when they are home.
Yeah.
So whether that's when they get home, whether that's on the weekends, so that they're experiencing being a full-time parent as much as possible. And then they get it.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so hard to explain to people what it's like to be with a new baby until you're actually in it.
Yeah.
Because you wonder, you know, you'd come home and she was sitting on the couch when you left, and she's sitting on the couch when you arrive home, and you think, what the hell?
And she still hasn't had a shower or managed to clean her teeth or anything like that. Yeah. Covered in breast milk or vomit or
frustration,
whatever.
Yeah. And yet to a partner, she can look like she's, you know, handling everything, or she knows the baby better and she's the expert, and it becomes very easy to confer to the primary carer during the day. And that's a recipe for angst and disconnect. Yeah.
It sets up problems down the track.
Yeah.
Lives can become very separate. It's, you know, like it's a natural thing to want to do, to divide and conquer, because it gives us, it means you cope with those stresses and I'll cope with these stresses, but that can set couples up to have very separate lives. And this will play out down the track in the next couple of stages, which are managing conflict is the next stage. So everything that we've spoken about can contribute to conflict in the first year of family. And so couples will find that they're, you know, more irritable, more resentful, more frustrated, arguing more. But we don't want that stage to become a permanent problem for couples. We want it to just be a stage that they can get through and learn the skills to manage conflicts and to negotiate differences, so that the conflict doesn't become a permanent problem for them, which is what can happen for couples. Some of the couples that I was seeing, the conflict and the disconnection, which I'll talk about in the final stage, which is next, the conflict and the disconnection became a permanent problem for years or even decades.
Wow.
In their relationship. And yet it stemmed from the perinatal period. But they just got into a rut of managing differences and conflict in a certain way that was not helpful, and that actually just caused more problems. So stage 7 is all about, now that you know that life's what real life is like with a baby, and now that you know what supports you've got or don't have, and now that things, you know, have settled down, this is the time, if you haven't before now, and I mean, we teach people in our before baby classes to do this, but if they haven't done a class before now, to learn the skills needed for new parents. And it's really about simple, clear and direct communication. It's about embracing those emotions, agreeing to be vulnerable with each other and making it safe to be vulnerable with each other, because the vulnerability helps our baby. And having the skills to be able to be clear and open with each other. So that's all about knowing what we need and being able to verbalize that to a partner. So for me, I remember with my husband, just a story that, you know, I'd had one of those days where I just felt like a complete failure. My self-esteem was really low. I felt really bad about myself. I just didn't know if I had what it took to be a mum. And I remember him coming home, and I said to him, I was that desperate, I suppose, that I said to him, I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't want you to respond. I just want you to give me a hug. So I started talking, and I was just like verbal diarrhea, and he started to respond. I said, no, I don't want you to talk. I just want you to give me a hug at the end of this. And I just told him everything about what I was feeling and how I felt like a failure and how I felt like I was fat and I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know if we'd made the wrong decision or whatever. And I said, now just give me a hug and I'll be okay. And he did. He gave me a hug and I was fine. And
I bet he was relieved, Elly, that he didn't have to find a solution to all of that. That was a big lot of problems right there.
So relieved.
Yeah.
But that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Is that if we can articulate, if we can tell our partner what we want and they can give us what we need, we're okay. We can get up the next day and we can do it all over again.
Which is just to be heard. Just to be heard, a lot of it.
Heard and cared for.
Yeah.
Heard and cared for. And because he could do that for me, I felt like I wasn't doing it on my own.
Yeah. And all of those problems you just vomited out of your mouth will potentially change in the next 10 minutes, day, week, and you'll feel very differently. And that's the thing. There's no absolutes. We're going through this just whirlwind of different feelings and new adaptations and new sense of identity about who we are. Yeah. So whilst it can feel like the biggest problem now, once it's come out of you, there's a feeling of, I can just be now. And to have a partner who hugs you at the end is just gold. That's beautiful. Are there any other sort of little, because I think transparency is the key, little things that can really move the needle to help couples navigate those storms?
Yes, absolutely. So this is stage 8. So stage 8 is the final stage in the model, and that's to stay connected.
Right.
That's for couples to stay connected despite what's going on, because, there has been a lot of storms that could divide them, but there's probably going to be even more storms coming.
Yeah.
That when they realize that, like you said with your husband, we're in this together, whether we like this or not, we want to be in this together. So we have to find ways to be in this together.
Yeah.
And so there's multiple ways that couples can do that. Whether it's checking in regularly, as I said, whether it's connecting at the end of their day, whether it's debriefing their days, whether it's about being willing to be vulnerable and to share their emotions and just to keep talking. It's easier to stay connected, but it's quite common for couples to disconnect and then reconnect and then disconnect and then reconnect. So if they're feeling a little bit antsy or a bit frustrated or a bit irritated or whatever, for me that's often a sign that I've actually become disconnected. So I need to initiate something, whether it's a discussion or affection or whatever, to feel connected to my partner again. Because if I feel connected to my partner, I feel stronger in myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it also, and you can never underestimate this, is to be connected to yourself. And the only way you can really do that is to do little things that to care for yourself. We talk about self-care, and when you've had a baby, self-care can just be like, that just sounds too hard. But part of the problem is we think we have to self-care in the way we used to before we had a baby, like go to the gym every morning or have a massage at the day spa or something like that. But self-care is a little bit like that butterfly effect. Little things can make a big difference. And so challenging yourself to just have a full cup of tea with your best teacup and fresh leaves and just sit and focus on drinking that tea, 5 minutes can transform your sense of who you are, your connection to yourself, and then your ability to be in relationship. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So part of what we talk about is, in real estate, they say location, location, location. Well, we say connection, connection, connection. And what that means is connecting to ourselves first.
Yeah.
Because we can't ask for what we need if we don't know what we need.
No, that's right.
So connecting to ourselves first, and it could be checking in with ourselves at any moment in the day and saying, what do I need now? And often it's to rest. Often it's to just sit down for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
There's guided meditations on YouTube that take 5 minutes, you know, and just do a 5-minute guided meditation, or watch something funny on TikTok, or, you know, just it can only take a few minutes to check in with yourself, but it's really important to do. And then it's connection with a partner or with a friend. You know, I really talk about how it's important, especially for the stay-at-home parent, to have somebody as a good friend that they can say anything to, that they're not going to be judged like, I'm ready to throw this baby out the window. And that friend encourages them to figure out what they need and then to bring the partner in. Because often friendships, or sometimes friendships, can be really unhelpful. Like, I can really just trash my husband, and then if my friend says, yeah, he's an absolute, you know, whatever, you should leave him, that's actually not helpful.
That's not constructive at all.
Not constructive. What we need is a friend that understands what it's like to be a parent, and to be in a relationship with somebody else who is also a new parent. And
that's really helpful, because it doesn't load up the partner to be everything all the time. You know, they always say it takes a village, but what does that really mean? It means that there should be more than one person there to be with you, not just the one person. It's too much pressure, and it's unrealistic.
And it's unrealistic because they're not experiencing it as well. If they are out working, they get glimpses of it. They get to experience a bit of it. But there's a big difference between, this is my experience a couple of hours a day, and this is my experience all day, every day, for the next couple of years.
24/7.
24/7. Yeah. So connection to self, connection to partner, and connection to supports. And whether that's friendships, or whether that's professionals, or whether that's, you know, online groups or organizations that provide support, there is so much support out there. And it's about accessing that support, and connection to baby, of course, too. Should be connection, but so that's the model. And it's really about trying to help parents focus on what they kind of need now, letting go of everything else that will come at some stage. But for right now, use your limited time and energy to focus on just this little bit, and maybe the next stage that's coming, and then that actually will help the following stages to be easier, because you're already starting to learn the skills. So, for example, the two big things are conflict and connection. And you probably may not have noticed, but they're actually built in to the earlier to all of the stages. So avoiding conflict and creating connection are already built into the earlier stages through some of the things that I've suggested and that we've spoken about.
That's really powerful. I love how you've brought value to this phase, because the reality is, if your relationship's shit, everything's shit. It's so foundational, and yet it's very easy for a new mother to get so immersed in the experience of a new baby to forget about the people around her. And it's very easy for the non-primary carer to sort of hover on the edges of a new baby and not necessarily get in their boots and all. But I encourage all of my families to really, and that's the beauty of modern living, we're doing this more, is that parents get in their boots and all, and that the child experiences both parents, and they take different things from each parent at different times. So this is really a moment of creating a family and a level of relationship that's way more mature, that can stand the test of time, and build a greater level of intimacy through being in the trenches together, which is way beyond romantic love ever was. I mean, that's certainly what I've discovered, and I think that's just gold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Elly, I love your work. I love the fact that you've brought so much of this to light for new parents. Is there anything else that you would like to share that could really move the needle for people?
Yeah, sure. I think it's mainly to do with conflict. I think before baby, we tend to approach conflict with a right-wrong attitude, where we're right and our partner is wrong. But having a baby means that you have a shared reality, a really shared reality for the first time maybe in your relationship. So parenthood is not so much about right or wrong, but about two parents' perspectives. And so because you have this baby as a shared reality, the aim is not to be right or to be wrong, it's to find middle ground. It's to find middle ground. And the middle ground might just be we both care about our baby. Because middle ground is where you are going to build your family foundations going forward.
Yeah.
By the time you've got a toddler who is waiting to do things one parent's way or the other parent's way because they can't agree,
yeah,
you don't want that.
Yeah.
You want to be able to find middle ground. And the middle ground might just be, let's research this more. Let's get some more information. Let's ask somebody for their opinion. It might be just getting more information about an issue so that you've got a clearer way forward. For a baby, their parents' relationship is more important than any one issue that might become between them.
That's gold right there. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And you've been a big inspiration for the work that I do with new mothers in the Thriving as a New Mothers group. And we talk also about having those hard conversations in order to find that middle ground and understand that shared reality, because that's so true. That is so true.
Yeah.
I'll just share. This is from Lisa Nichols, and she came up, I think she came up with the term carefrontation. And it's going through an issue of getting really, really clear what you need to say, particularly not so sometimes the surface level of what you think the conflict is about, but what's really underpinning the conflict, just diving a little bit deeper.
Hidden issues.
Hidden issues, we think it's about one thing, but actually it's much more. Often,
do you love me? Do you care for me? Do you respect
me? It's that vulnerable thing.
To me?
I'm feeling inadequate. This is making me feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Those deeper, more vulnerable emotional issues. And then talking about, it just goes really clearly. I'll just share this with people who could be listening. The beginning is, the first statement you say is, what I appreciate about you is, so you acknowledge that beautiful value that this person is in your life. And then the next sentence starts with, what I struggle with in this situation is, how is this for you? Getting their perspective, knowing that there is a shared reality. And then the final is, can we make an agreement too? And I think that just highlights beautifully what you've just said. And certainly sharing that in my mother's groups, I've listened to some incredible stories where people have really been able to shift relationships into that new level of maturity. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
And what you've shared with us.
I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I hope it's inspired people listening to really put energy into your relationship, because it is so foundational to everything with your babies and your children, but also your own well-being, and recognise that relationships are designed to grow and to become wiser and evolve and becoming us, and to expand your capacity to love even through the difficult times. So that's the journey I think we're all on.
Absolutely. And all of that benefits the baby too.
Oh, absolutely.
All of that benefits the baby too.
Yeah.
It's not wasted work.
No, it isn't. Parents are good. The babies are fine. Thank you, Elly.
My pleasure, Tracy.
So grateful.